My name is Jim. I am a writer primarily. I've written 6 books, a couple of them graphic novels, a couple of regular old novels, bunch of movies, and about a dozen indie video games. Most of them focusing on a narrative sort of approach, given that that's my strong suit. And yeah, and right now I'm employed as a narrative designer at a game studio in Toronto called Get Set Games. But back at the beginning, 2001, that was my first video game, inspired by the text adventure games of old, but set in a more modern setting. In this case, you are a 14-year-old kid. You're just entering into grade 9 at the most conservative school in the city, but you've just given yourself a mohawk. So you have to impress your teachers, or you have to impress your peers and piss off your teachers, so you earn enough punk points to escape the suburbs. So loosely based on my experience as a teenager. That was my first game. I was surprised and delighted that my second game was well received enough to be nominated for an award at something called Indiecade in Los Angeles. And I went on to be able to collaborate with Matt Hammill, who's best known for Lovers in Dangerous Space-Time, at a thing called Toe Jam, or the Toronto Game Jam was where we started this particular game. This, as you can see, is also a kind of old school text adventure. And in these games, you would type in commands and you would get responses. I was always a huge fan of those as a kid, and I wanted to see that sort of stay alive. And I was lucky enough to meet people in the community who were also making games usually using a tool called Inform. And for this game in particular, what we did was we used a piece of a library system called Vorple by Juhana, who you'll meet later. And this was the first time Juhana and I collaborated, and he was incredibly helpful in sort of getting us to be able to not just have words, but also have, as you can see, graphics on the side and some sound as well. And that was all enabled by his software, Vorple. I've also been lucky enough to collaborate with Paolo Perducini, who runs something called Molleindustria. And we had our games showcased at Sundance. And so that was a pretty wild trip for something that was largely a narrative branching a game about unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAV drone pilots. Anyway, takes you to today, or not today quite, but the reason that I'm speaking today is to basically introduce you to a tool that we made basically to explore the possibility space between the old school text adventure and something like Twine. If many of you may have heard of an interactive system called Twine that allows you to make interactive fiction. Similarly, we saw that there was a real appetite and a real community that sort of came up around Twine, and thought, well, wouldn't it, as interesting as Twine is in terms of community, as a creator, I had some sort of desires for a little bit more of a different approach. So as you can see here, I'll give you a little tour of a texture game. So this game is called Black Rock City. It's loosely based on my experiences at Burning Man. So basically, texture. So just to confirm, you guys are seeing the Black Rock City, right? Schedule. Okay, great. So just dragging words and other words here. In this case, you can drag get on a board, or you can drag talk to on young woman, and you get a different branch. So it's sort of a choose your own adventure, but with a touchscreen sort of friendly interface. So in this case, you can talk to a couple, or you can talk to a big man. If you talk to a couple, as you can see, it doesn't go to another page, but it has a text transformation here. So basically, I'll just come back into here. So that hopefully gave you a sense of the mechanic that texture uses. As I say, it's a word-on-word mechanic. It also facilitates game creation without any coding required. So basically, within the browser, you can use what you see is what you get kind of editor to add words and add interactions. And you can actually go all the way and publish a story that appears in the public library if you so choose. So it kind of sort of facilitates the playing, the creation, and the publishing on that one website. So some sort of interesting features about texture are that it, as I say, it's a word-on-word mechanic. So other systems basically rely on things such as verb and noun. So you might, like a tool like Inform, for instance, more or less is designed for you to accept input like take a sword or attack monster. So the sort of verb noun sort of thing is sort of built into the system. With texture, because it's a word-on-word mechanic, it's sort of agnostic to what type of words they are. So in this case, there is a story called Spare with Max that sort of experiments with adjective in words. So in this case, for instance, you could drag crazy onto story, sad onto story, and funny onto story, and get one of those types of stories. So it allows for a little bit more flexibility in terms of that interaction. Also, we found that when we released it, that we had people creating stories that were not involving words at all. In this case, you can see Golly Drat created emoji-based interactions for their basically their educational texture game about administering naloxone. And we also found that because it's built in the web browser, it basically allows for like sort of spontaneous kind of translation. So in this case, this is a texture game written in Spanish that by just using the Google Translate, you can actually translate in the browser and play it that way as well. So over the last few years, since texture was released, we've seen like about 1,500 users make several hundred games with the tool. But to basically kind of spread the word about it, I've been doing workshops in other cities as I visited or whatnot, and basically teaching adults how to use texture, but also how the sort of choosable path sort of structures can give people insight into narrative design as a whole. So I've been sort of like in a sort of ad hoc way, sort of using texture as an educational tool with adults. And recently, we've been thinking about the possibility of kind of expanding that to not just adults, but potentially kids from the age of 10 up. And the idea of having it available as an educational resource for elementary and high school teachers. So as I say, we have already sort of done it for university classes. I've done them at OCAD and UBC and different places, and I think that there's lots of potential to sort of expand modules specifically related to interactive fiction and narrative design. But we've also seen that it has a really good effect in engaging reluctant writers. So as opposed to reluctant readers, these are kids that aren't sort of interested in writing, but with the extra interactive component sort of it tends to hook them. Similarly, kids who are more game interested sort of find the interaction sort of interesting and engaging. And right now, we're sort of seeing, obviously, a ton of digital learning going on. And, just sort of looking at the fact that people are more comfortable with learning and sort of deploying sort of educational sort of things through computers and through the internet. We thought that this might be an interesting thing for the sort of learning at home that we're seeing now. So one of the things, a couple of things that we've added, or that Juhana has added, and actually Juhana's on the call. I'm going to introduce him at the end of the talk. Juhana's added the ability for teachers basically to have their students just use their existing Google Classroom logins. So similar to how you would see it in lots of different applications, Texter now has the option to just click in with use your Google login. And this was requested by teachers specifically because of privacy issues and the fact that most school boards don't allow for kids to use any service that requires them to create logins. The other thing that we introduced was the idea of private libraries. And this mostly came out of my own workshop experiences in that we wanted a way for people to be able to publish during the workshop, people would create a game, and some of them were willing to share it so that we could play it up on the big screen together. And so having them publish it to the public library was a little bit of a big ask because they saw that as being very exposed. So we created these private libraries so that it can be specific for a classroom or a workshop or a writer circle or whatever. And it's just sort of available. It's unlisted anywhere except for the people that are that you share it with directly. There's also, at the same time, Juhana added unlisted links so that you can share, you can publish things and make them public that don't appear in the public library, which up until that point wasn't possible. But now you can just share a link with a friend or with a small group of people, or as you see fit. And the third thing that we were working with a local teacher, Mike B, who had developed some pretty innovative resources for teaching manga. He basically has done a draft of a Texter module for teachers to use. So we're just we're working with him on that. And basically, the next steps that we're looking at are doing sort of outreach to individual educators. So we're still very much in the information gathering stage. To sort of basically, we're interested in seeing working with educators who want to pilot it for their classes, and we figure after about 10 or 12 kind of classes, we'll have a bit of a more information to kind of like approach things after that. And in that process, we're hoping to isolate issues or desired features. And at this stage, we're also kind of like looking for funding sources and to expand outreach and to develop materials and that kind of thing. And the thing that we wanted to actually specifically kind of throw out to the crowd here, we've been kind of very interested in open sourcing the project. and sort of exploring the sort of the possibility of that. The issue that one of the issues we face is that for Juhana to get it into shape for it to be shared publicly, is gonna take a certain amount of time, and we're kind of curious to make sure that there is some community interest in people getting involved afterwards, before we sort of make that step and invest that time. So yeah, that's basically it. Juhana, I don't know if you can wave or show yourself. Let me just stop sharing here. Boop. We can go back to our grid. There's Juhana is like
Hello.
directly here. Oh, there he is. Yes. So so yeah, as I mentioned, like Juhana has done all the coding. He's actually in Finland right now, where he lives. And is it 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning there?
It's 2:30. So
2:30.
I'll set the record here. Yeah.
Yes. So I think he wins. I heard midnight. It's good, but not close. You know, not as good as 2. I mean, that's pretty good. Anyway, yeah. So I don't know what the normal process is. If we take questions or feedback, or
yeah. For sure. Thank you so much. Let's give like a virtual applause from there. That was really, really interesting.
cool.
Super appreciated that. Yeah, so let's take like five or so minutes for questions. Do we have any questions? Maybe just put your finger to your nose if you have a question, or you can drop it in the chat with the letter Q. Anyone want to kick off with a question? Emily always has questions. No questions for Emily?
I do have a question. Sorry, I was simultaneously tweeting, and I'm not good at multitasking tonight.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Jim, my question is about one of the examples that you mentioned, that a user had created a game about administering naloxone. I'm
Yes.
really curious about this scenario, and can you tell us more? And also, like, what is the interface that users come on board and create games, like that broadly and specifically naloxone?
Okay, so yeah, so I actually know the person who did that, like, or who created it. So and I was delighted that they had such an interesting approach to sharing that information. It's something they're very passionate about, and you know, as much as we created this tool, primarily thinking of you know, like more fictional adventure game sort of kind of formats. Yeah, I was delighted to see people going in a different direction with it. Yeah, we've had nothing but positive experiences. No one's done any hate speechy things, or like, you know, like really negative side of things. Yeah, so oh geez, I'm just getting a call. Sorry. I can come down and I'm just in the middle of a presentation. Could you leave it with the concierge?
I'm not actually allowed to do concierge. I've got to do delivery next door, so I can do that, and then.
Can you leave it at the door? I'll buzz you.
I'll just unmute for a second. Does anyone have any questions for Juhana by any chance? How about this question from David? Maybe you might know, Juhana. Was there a link to the documentation for texture?
Yeah, we don't have documentation as such. So the interface is designed to be like as intuitive as possible. So you can just start writing, and it works as it is. So what we have is as an interactive tutorial. So when you go to the website for the first time to create a story, then you get it asks you if you want to start the tutorial that walks you through the whole thing. But that's yeah, it's kind of at the moment it's missing the like a proper documentation material.
Yeah, that's great. I know we have a few other here, but they're Oh,
Could I elaborate? Sorry. I just any sort of link. There it is. Okay, I just couldn't find the link. Thank you.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
And there's another question that I can answer about the amount of users, how many users they are visiting the games. So I don't have the like the current numbers, but there's about 200 games available in the public library, and then there's the private libraries that have like I think maybe 100 or so in them. But just to guess, I haven't counted them, and
yeah,
I don't go check the private libraries if I don't need to do some technical work there. But so about 200 games, and there may be about 2,000 visits per month at the moment. So that's the ballpark.
Excellent. Yeah, that's amazing. I know Jim has left us, and we do have a question from Christine, so maybe we can go back to it. We can continue on with the programming unless anyone else wants to drop a question we can address later. But for now, I'm just going to keep the program moving, and when Jim gets back to us, we'll connect back with Jim. But that was wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Juhana. Will you be available to stick around after if people have questions? I know it's like super late there. We'll let you decide.
Yeah, sure, no problem. My
Okay.
sleep schedule is messed up already, so no problem.
Okay, that's wonderful. We'll do a plug at the end as well. Okay, great. So I'm just gonna sort of wrap up. And I just make sure that I stopped. Yeah, okay, great. So carrying on. Okay, great. So we've had our presentations, which were amazing. There we go. There's the media, social media place if you want to follow them on Twitter. Jim, Munroe, Juhana, Interactive Writing and Education. Okay, like our values preach, we believe in iteration and constant improvement. So when you do join our open public Slack channel, if you haven't already, or if you're on the Slack channel, please feel free to join #better-virtual. Drop in any of your feedback for these sessions, and that can include speakers, it can include how we reach out to you, promote you, it can include anything. So please, we'd love to hear what you think and how we can continue improving our evenings, our hack nights. This is now the portion which I should have been ready for, but I'm going to open up the document, link.civictech.ca/hacknight, and give everyone an opportunity to drop in an announcement you might have, or a project that you want to work to. Keep it to 30 seconds, please. That is how we roll. So this is, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open up that link, but while I'm looking for that page, if anybody has not so much projects they want to pitch, but just like general announcements, like maybe you have like an event coming up this week, or if you have a webinar that's open to the public, or you want to